May the merits of these teachings benefit all beings. May these words heal and not harm. May they clarify and not confuse. May they self-liberate, leaving no trace behind. All right, so we are continuing our study of Thich Nhat Hanh's Understanding Our Mind. And I think I may have been a little ambitious when I asked you to read verses 1 to 10, but we'll see how far we get. So the first one, Thich Nhat Hanh says, the mind is a field. And he had this quote that I thought really, well, let me say the quote. Every day, our thoughts, words, and deeds plant new seeds in the field of our consciousness, and what these seeds generate becomes the substance of our life. We could just stop right there and not go any further. I mean, that is essentially the whole thing. Our thoughts, our words, our deeds plant new seeds in the field of our consciousness, and what these seeds generate becomes the substance of our lives. In one sense, not in the sense that he intended it, when Descartes said, I think, therefore I am. From a Buddhist perspective, what we think is what we are. And you could also say in a slightly different sense that when we don't think, right, in a moment of falling away of body and mind, do we exist? We don't exist in the usual way. And yet, you know, if you were sitting in your home and you were able in a moment of self-absorption to let go of thoughts enough that the thinker disappeared, if somebody walked by, they would see you there. You would not be there for yourself. You would not exist for yourself in the usual way. Do you understand what I mean? Do you agree? And if you're not either shaking your head, yeah. So you don't know, Norm, tell me. Go ahead, were you going to ask something? Or do you want to say something? Norm?
Yeah. One of the things that I got early on in the book was that he was saying that we create everything. I can't. That's where my mind went. We create everything. He almost bumped against, if we don't see it, it's not there. Like whatever's behind me, it really isn't there. If I turn around, I'm going to create it.
Right. So what existence is in Buddhism takes on a particular meaning. And I just want to make clear that when we say we create the world with our minds, you're not doing that by yourself. As Thich Nhat Hanh makes clear, there's individual seeds and there's collective seeds. So we're doing this together. You can't, it's impossible for any one person to create reality by themselves. So if somebody was to say to me, oh, what you're having is somatic, you know, you're creating it in your mind. Yes, but I'm not doing that by myself. And that's important. Kathy, you had your hand up?
Yes, hi. You were asking about if we're not thinking, if we become concentrated in our meditation and we're no longer in our thinking mind, the thinking mind falls away. we're no longer identifying with the ego and the self. So we become the selfless self within that context. So I just wanted to say I can see how that, so we're no longer identifying with the ego, I guess is how I see it.
Right. And so in that moment, who are you?
You're in the field of consciousness in some way, I suppose, right? He talks about the field.
Mm-hmm.
You're still creating seeds within your environment that you're in, because the seeds are always there, right?
Yes, but in a moment of dropping away of body and mind, well, I guess the seed would be unmanifested.
Right.
So
There's pure potentiality in every moment.
Right.
Which is kind of a metaphor of the seed, right?
And that's the importance about the seed, that they're not fixed. So the seed, even if it's on the ground, it's potential, right? And later he talks about it gets impregnated, and in the right conditions, it blossoms.
It blossoms.
That's why it's important to remember that every single impression that we take in goes in. It goes in, and that's why it's important. That's why it's important to be aware of what we take in and what's already in there.
And going back to your thoughts and words, those are potentiated seeds, right? They've come forth into.
Exactly.
Right. So that's where, can you really choose what you manifest? Past, present, future. They start to create each other, right?
Well, so let's get into that. He talks about that. Yeah, exactly. How much choice do we have? Lena, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I guess it's a question about, it strikes me that Thich Nhat Hanh talks a lot about, that we are our ancestors and they are us, and that we, all time past is time present, future. We carry these different consciousnesses with us, and the seeds that they've planted in us, whether they're manifested or not, whether we inherit them. And I was just wondering how then, in the example that you gave, are we ever not present, since we are made of so many different presences? Does that make sense? What Kathy was saying about how the mind and body fall away, and that we are not attached to this self. If the self is not one, it's multiple, and it's always fluctuating, are we ever not present? Such as when we're standing in a crowd or a protest, and we might not be saying something, but the fact of our presence, I just I don't know if we're never, do we have to be fully in awareness to be present?
I think I know what you mean. I guess I would say, so in that moment, again, you haven't disappeared in a poof of smoke. So Nina is there, but Nina doesn't know that Nina is there. And so I see that as a moment in which Nina is not Nina. Nina is interbeing. Nina is the whole universe. That's why we work so hard, why we sit so much, in Zen in particular, is to cross that threshold. Actually, Master Dogen calls it the ancestor's room. You go into the ancestor's room. Actually, that's a very nice way of saying it, given what you just said. So you enter, you cross the threshold, you enter into that room, And you know, really when you come out, that it wasn't just you, that all of your ancestors are there. All of the ancestors, not just what you think of as your own lineage, but the entire world, the entire universe, past, present, and future. You can't know that in that space, so you have to leave the room again. Then you're Nina, then you can be aware, and then you know that. I just want to make sure that this is clear, because I'm talking about an experience. I'm describing something, and is what I'm saying clear? If you are not nodding, does that mean that it's not clear or you're not sure? Okay. Jitsuko, I'll be right with you. Sarah.
I don't know if it's clear, but I think I've had the experience of feeling like, you know, ancestors are behind me or family lineage is there present in moments of spiritual seeking. But I wanted to get to something you said about how much choice do we have, because that stood out to me in this reading. The idea that we should be watering some seeds and not watering other seeds to try to help cultivate or create conditions that, you know, the seeds that we want to manifest, that, you know, if we put our attention there, then that's what will be manifested. I struggled with that because I think of, you know, where my attention lands and where I might want it to land instead, or what's worthy of my attention and concentration and what's not. You know, and what are those seeds? Are they feelings? Like, I think personally, I think I'm always working on is trying to listen more attentively to the feelings that are arising inside of me, whereas like my natural impulse is more to maybe suppress or just sort of, you know, push forward without really listening to my own, you know, and I would call them seeds, right? Things that are somewhere in my consciousness but not fully realized. I don't know. I think that this is something that a lot of questions came up for me in this reading. So interested to hear other voices on it.
Okay. So let me, Jitsuko, if you could hold just for a second, as I think as we get into it, I hope that some of that will be answered. So, you know, so we've talked about, so things we're co-creating this reality. So things aren't just happening to us. There is a reciprocity, right? There are certain things that we're doing, certain things that we're choosing, certain things that are happening. But how we react to those things will then determine what happens to those seeds. And so, and then Thich Nhat Hanh makes this distinction, right, of the individual and the collective consciousness, likens it later on to the collective unconscious of Jung, which again, just, you know, it really stresses to me the importance of our thoughts and why we place such emphasis on training the mind. And he speaks repeatedly about mindfulness as the tool, the main tool that you use to first be aware of the seeds, be aware that they're there, two, which ones you are choosing to nurture, to water, which ones you're choosing to ignore, or which ones you're not aware are there, but you're still acting out of their potential, you know, if you will, which in one sense maybe touches on what you're speaking of, Sarah. And so in the second verse, he says, every kind of seed, if a seed of delusion is watered in us, our ignorance will grow. If we water the seed of enlightenment, it will grow and our wisdom will flourish. So Jitsuko, I don't know if this is your question, but let me also throw out another question. How do we water the seed of enlightenment? He's basically saying both are there. The seeds of samsara and the seeds of nirvana are always present, all of them. And so he's saying, okay, we need to water the seeds of wisdom, the seeds of enlightenment, because then that's what's going to flourish. How? How do we do that? Jitsuko.
I think I'm a little bit ahead.
Okay.
I think I'm on number 5.
Okay, then can I hold for a moment?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm on the collective and individual thing.
Okay. So another important point in verse 2, the 3 pairs of signs. Were these clear? We have universal and particular. We have unity and diversity, and formation and disintegration. Are these clear to you? Can you give me an example that is not the example of a house, which he gave, that has all 3 signs?
I just wanted to say, I feel like I'm not totally clear on the distinction between the first 2 pairs. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Does anybody else feel the same way? And this is, if you're looking at your book, this is on page, it begins on page 27. It goes from 27 to 28.
Can you read it again?
Sure. So there's 3 signs, lakshana. The 3 marks, the 3 characteristics of a thing according to the Yogacara. And so the first one divides things into the universal and the particular. The second sign divides them in terms of unity and diversity. And the third divides them in terms of formation and disintegration. And so, do other people have the same question that Jess said, or have an answer, have an example for Jess? What's the difference between universal and particular and unity and diversity? Yes, Karen.
I wrote in my book a cat
Okay.
as universal. And then I look at a Siamese cat as a particular cat. And then I can even go into my cat. So I was looking at that as universal. And I didn't get into the second one using the cat, but.
Yeah, well, the diversity would be the different kinds of Siamese cats. So there's that one and that one and that one and that one and that one. He's also saying, in terms of a whole and its parts. So in the case of a cat, tail, whiskers, the eyes, the ears, what makes a cat, right? And this is one of the ways in which Buddhism in a very fundamental way says, okay, when you take away these various parts, where's the cat? Can you point to any of those parts and say, that one is cat, that one is cat?
No.
When you put them together, is the sum of the parts, so let me give you another question. Is the sum of the parts the same as the whole?
I would say yes.
Yes, why?
Because you put together that universal cat. The ears, the whiskers. But it wouldn't be a tiger, maybe. Well, it would be, because they all have the same parts.
Okay, Jess?
To partly answer my own question, I think that they're not the same because a little bit lower down, he says that essentially through mindfulness that we're training ourselves to see these 3 different types of signs and also to be able to see the distinction between the 2 types of signs. So for instance, using that line of thinking, then put the sum of the parts is still the mind that's looking at all of the parts. In other words, seeing the, which one is it? Particular versus the whole, which is seeing the universal, which is not the same.
Is that clear? Well, so let me put it this way. If I take off the Raksu and I take off my arm and I take off the mala and I take off this leg and then, you know, my shorts, you know, if I take off all of these different pieces and then I just put them back together, is the sum of all of these pieces Zuisei? Sarah, you're shaking your head. No. Okay, why?
No, I think there's definitely something different when you're viewing the universal. When you view the universal, it's different from cataloging each part. You're looking at something different, which is like, regardless of the makeup of the parts, it's its own entity as a whole. And that's something different. There's a different quality to it when you're looking at the whole versus when you're itemizing the parts.
I would agree with that. And the reason I would agree with that is, you know, when you think of a sacred space, let's say a place like the Zendo in the monastery, or you go into an old church, the parts, you know, there's bricks and perhaps there's wood and there's glass and there's a crucifix or a Buddha statue. Perhaps there's pews or there's cushions. And there is something else that makes that space sacred. And I think if we take some of what Thich Nhat Hanh is saying, and what Nina, you were alluding to, it takes all of the ancestors that walked through that room, all of the liturgy that was done there, all of the zazen that was done in a place like the Zendo. There is something that is being infused. I wrote a piece about this at one point, you know, that we're co-creating a sacred space. There's something that we bring to it, and there's something that the space kind of infuses into us as well. That if we just take all of these things, you know, we try to look at each of these components, it doesn't explain the thing itself. I mean, when Thich Nhat Hanh gives that example of now they've been able to clone a sheep, right, from a single cell. And my question is, and I don't know the answer to this, is the sheep as sheep, as a regular sheep, you know, as a quote unquote natural sheep? Or is there something missing? And I don't know, I really don't know, but I wonder. There's something here in life that goes beyond the mechanistic approach. And so is that distinction clear now, the universal in particular and unity and diversity? I mean, unity and diversity, if you think about, just couldn't bring myself to close the window.
He says that everything has both a universal and a particular nature. So when you were saying you pull apart your arm, take your Raksu off, but when you put it back, that makes it come back to being universal and particular, right? If you
yes. And my question, which he doesn't really touch on, is are they synonymous? Is the sum of the particles the whole? And my argument is that there's more than the sum of parts that makes up a self, a person, a being, let's say. Jitsuko?
Okay, so they say that the greatest advancement in mathematics was the discovery of the sat. Before, if you were a waitress, before there was a sat, and you would go to a table and everybody at the table ordered fish, person number one, fish, 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 fish. Then the waitress would go back to the cook and say, the cook would be like, what do you need? And the waitress would say, fish, 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 fish. And then somebody came along and invented the number 5. So then the waitress would be fish, 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 fish from the customer, go to the cook, 5. And it's both. It's both 5 and it's fish, 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 fish.
Mhm.
And my thing is that I'm asking is, I think that there's no place that is for myself that is my inside garden and the outside garden are the same, as we say. So when you ask me, who are you when you disappear? I would say, what am I not? Who am I not when I disappear?
That's a good answer. Exactly.
Thank you. Thank you.
Adam.
I think something that just that has been, I remember was stuck in my craw when I was reading this, and still is that the idea of universal, in particular, the universal is something that we have created for our convenience to call something, this is a cat, we're human beings, these are apples, there's one of them, there's 2 apples, 1 + 1 = 2, but that's not real. That's not the reality of things. There's just one of each thing. There's just one of each appearance. There's not a universal. That's just something we made up. I mean, and we need it. We can't, the world would be madness if we weren't able to categorize it. But that seems to me fundamentally not the truth. I can see, I don't, that's what I don't understand is there something inherently universal in things, which to me doesn't seem that there is.
Yeah, so you're talking about the designation, the label.
Yes, or just to say cat is, again, that's how we classify the world, but it's not how reality is.
Right, but as you point out, so in order to function in this world, I need to know that cat is different from lamp, right? And
Yeah.
so at some point, somebody developed language and said cat, lamp, bed, and therefore, we're stuck to some extent, with these labels. Are they inherent? No, nothing is inherent. Nothing is inherent. So in that space of interbeing, of unity, there is no cat, and there's no lamp, and there's no Adam needing to know one from the other.
Right.
And so we need to see that space as well. And in fact, that the second sign, the unity and diversity really reminded me of this koan. All things return to the one. What does the one return to? Because that's exactly bringing that sign forth, both. It's exactly that.
Okay.
So does that soften it in your craw a little bit?
Yeah, it does. It's I guess for me, I don't know. The other pairs seem to me to be more describing reality better than that first pair for me. But
yeah, I mean, I guess it's the question, why is there something instead of nothing? And why is there all these many somethings? And it's possible. I mean, you're right. It's possible that if our consciousness was constructed differently, that we wouldn't need to differentiate, that we would just be able to function without it. But so far, that's not the case.
yes, I don't see it anytime in the near future.
Nina. And then there's disintegration, formation and disintegration. And I think that one, the moment something comes into being, it's already dying. I think that one is quite evident. Yes, Nina.
I just wanted to, I sort of understand all of this, I want to say on a heart level, and it arises from my heart that and maybe it is very self-referential, or relational, but when you gave the example of or when you spoke to us about your fatigue and the impact on you, does that make you less Zuisei? Does that, or does that subtract something from you? Is that a disability? I think part of what we're hopefully seeing in liberation, in human liberation from concepts and constructs and through gender and race is we see only in parts, but those parts are not the whole of the person. And in my lived experience, that is love, that is looking deeply. And I think that's what Thich Nhat Hanh really touches on, that when you see someone angry, you also see suffering. Or when you see someone attached to a view, you remind yourself that's also the person who did something very good, or was generous to you. And for me, it really is a kind of a heart practice to see that interbeing. I get less bogged down in the intellectual, disintegration, but that goes for the same, like you, as we say, your example, you are both disintegrating and changing. You're choosing the ocean. Your impermanence is also a gift to you, that you can realize an aspiration to simplify your life and awaken further on the path by shifting your perspective on this affliction. So I guess I just want to say that for me, it's very intuitive and it's like in a heart space to look deeply and see beyond those dualities or those parts. And we are more than the sum of our parts, right? We are more than, a white person or whatever, all these different parts. Anyway, enough.
Yeah, no, that's very nicely said. And all of our bias, all of our judgment towards ourselves or another, all of our misconceptions, misunderstandings are born from distance. So in order to heal, you have to get close. So from the perspective of looking at my regular, self, yes, feeling fatigued feels like a diminishment. And there are times, when if I think of it that way, then I start to feel really down. When I just get close and I'm just inside my body, that is just the experience. And so I'm just trying to be present with what is, and then it's not a problem. Now, would I like it to be different? Yes, definitely. At times I do. But the only way, I think, actually, to heal separation, of course, is through closeness with a person, with a circumstance, with a label, with a misconception. I mean, when Thich Nhat Hanh says, when we're in an intimate relationship, most of the time, we're not in a relationship with a person. We're in a relationship with our idea of them. And then we wonder why we're in so much pain, why it's so difficult to get along. That's why we need to be able to see the person in front of us without, just to give them space and give us space within that. Yes, Hunter. Question of verse 4.
I think it relates, and it's upon this thread that we're talking about of just like what is innate. The verse says, some seeds are innate, handed down by our ancestors. Some were sown while we were still in the womb, others sown when we were children. I've been trying to, in my experience of deep meditation, really discern what are the sources of some of these experiences that I'm feeling. Because some deep aches and pains feel bottomless in some way. And it's just a question of how can one start to discern the origin of something that feels nameless and beyond words in some way.
How did you feel when Thich Nhat Hanh said, "You're your father"?
Well, I smile now. There's also a part of me that's terrified in that notion.
Yeah. If I said to you, Hunter, this particular seed of insecurity, I'm making this up. This one comes from your father. This one isn't yours, but this one comes from your father, and you've inherited it. This other seed of jealousy, this one is yours. Will you work with each one differently?
You know, just as when you reflect it back to me like that, I suppose some seeds are needing a narrative, and in some way maybe useful to discern an origin. Would I work with them differently? Perhaps I would have, but I also feel like it's similar to what you're talking about with cutting up the body. You know, if I just like see one seed and I'm like, oh, that's the seed of, you know, that has origins in my grandfather's back problem. But that's not separate from any of the other seeds. I think I'm at a loss. I'm not sure. You asked this question of me, would I work with them differently? I think I would. I think the narrative that would form in my mind about how I'm addressing each of those things in practice would be different.
So I think that's a good place to look, because I think, you know, so I'm walking down the street and I feel like somebody hits me. You know, immediately I get really upset, and I turn and I see that it's a branch from a tree. Oh, okay. I was still hit, but the fact that it wasn't intentional, that it wasn't a person, it was a tree, is like, it takes some of the sting off of it. But the interesting thing about practice is if you really just look at the moment and you look at the experience is still the experience of pain. Imagine if we could do the reverse. So somebody does hit us and we're like, okay, but the pain is here. This is what I have to work with, this pain. And as Nina said, can I see that the person may be hurting me because they are hurting, right? So we are so meaning making that we want to know that what's happening is not our fault. And we feel better, right, about ourselves when we realize that something has happened. Well, I didn't cause this. It's because it comes down from my past. What if we just take fault off the table entirely and just say, okay, just think about it in terms of responsibility. Here's the experience of insecurity. Maybe it comes from my father. Maybe it comes from things that I'm interacting with now. But really what I have to work with is this experience of insecurity. This is what I'm meeting in this moment. And it's not that where it comes from or the past that it's not important. Of course it is. But you still have to work to deal with the thing itself. And that's the most important thing. So I could get 5 diagnoses for what it is that I'm working with. And, you know, some of it might make a difference, certainly. Ultimately, I still need to deal with the fatigue every day. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not important, but I think sometimes we give it more importance than it has because it gives us something to hold on to. Because it's unsettling not to know.
Yeah. The map is not the terrain.
A bodhisattva's vow is to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. I'm going to put that on a sticker. I'm going to put that on a t-shirt. No, I wouldn't sell. Anyway. Norm.
Um, I think we're all trying to figure it out.
Yep.
And I think that's like the booby prize. What I kept hearing throughout as I read the material, which I absolutely loved and thoroughly enjoyed reading it, was get back on the cushion, get back on the cushion, get back on the cushion. You know, try and figure this out, you know, sit with a psychologist but get back on the cushion. That's where all the answers are. That's, yeah.
Yes, I think a lot of answers are there. And actually, let me just return to something that Hunter did say, because I think it's important. And maybe Jitsuko, this relates to your question, that, you know, when you understand that there are certain strains in you, certain patterns, certain behaviors that aren't just yours, that they come from a long time ago, or certain feelings, like somebody talks about, oh, in fact, Jitsuko, you've talked about this, and Hunter alluded to it, you know, a deep sadness, for example, or deep grief, or perhaps deep anger. When you begin to realize that the picture is much bigger, that it's not just you, and it's not your fault, it does make some things easier. And I think in a very nice way, it makes it easier to go back to the cushion and to feel yourself, you're sitting in that space with all of your ancestors, you know, all of that past, present, and future. Because it all has contributed to the person that you are today, to Norm sitting on that cushion today. And that actually is quite nice feeling to realize that you didn't get here by yourself.
Can I just add, I think it's all you. When you look out and you see that it's all you. Like, I was sitting on the beach and I saw the ocean, and it's like all me. It's all me. And it's like so relieving. Like, I don't have to want that piece of cake. It's all me. Like, it's all me.
Right.
It's flabbergasting. It's just beyond flabbergasting.
Yes, that version used to say, it's no self, we're all self. When the whole thing is you, you're right, and nothing is outside. There is, in that moment, even if it's in an instant, for an instant, there's no lack. There is no lack. That is so important to feel at least once. And then you'll forget, and you'll reach for that cake, or you'll reach for that, you know, whatever. But to remember, it is all me. Exactly. Exactly. Adam? That maybe last one.
I guess, you know, this sitting and, you know, and ancestors and what's alive in us. And I mean, I've been thinking about a lot because as you mentioned, I'm going to be a father in less than 3 months. And so I'm thinking about what is coming through me. What am I, you know, what are the seeds that I'm going to be planting in this new life? And, you know, and that I've, you know, realized there's just so many, I don't know if you'd call it karma or, but, you know, I'm thinking, for instance, my mother's mother was born in Russia, and she came here when she was 12 with her father and just 1 or 2 of her other like 13 siblings, because where they were, Jews were being persecuted. And so I have the seeds of a persecuted people. Now they came here, and the life that I lead is not the life of a persecuted person. The life that I lead is a life of white privilege. So now I also have, I mean, I don't have any ancestors who were slave owners, but the karma of that is mine now too, because I'm living in a society and benefiting from, the system that was put into place. And so that's alive in me too. And that is my responsibility to work with. And I mean, I do realize how infinite, my karma is also whoever, whatever led to the invention of the computer. That's that karma is alive in this moment because we're all here together. The first person who added 1 and 1, that person's karma is here with us and is alive. So I guess I'm thinking about what are the seeds that I want to hand down, and how do you not water the unwholesome seeds? And it's not by shoving them in the dark and pretending they're not there. It's sometimes you have to give attention to them in order to not water them. That actually shutting them out is watering them. And I have way too much to say on this topic, so I'll cut it short. But it's that chapter really rang a bell with me, and I'll leave it there.
The downside of that is that we become paralyzed because we realize the thing is so big and I have responsibility for so much that you would just freeze and not do anything. But of course, that's not really a very good option. And so you take one moment at a time. You pick up one seed and you look at it and you investigate it and you try to see, what is this? Do I even see that there's a seed here? And so moment by moment. And as Thich Nhat Hanh says, and you create an environment, you create conditions where you will be able to do that. This gathering, as he speaks of Plum Village in France, surrounding yourself with people who will help you, who will water the seeds of joy and of awareness, etc. So all of it contributes. So my original question, how do you water those seeds of enlightenment? That's how. That is how. By creating conditions and by getting close and by paying attention to one thing at a time.